So let us look at these questions. The first question, recent budget proposed sovereign bonds to invest in infrastructure. Critically analyze the relative benefits and costs associated with the sovereign bonds. So the question, because as you can see, almost every year they are asking one question from the budget in the last few years. This year, the most important innovation that they had come out with in the budget is about sovereign bonds. The question says that what are the benefits and what are the costs? It is said that we require 100 lakh crores of rupees for investment in infrastructure. It requires 100 lakh crores of rupees for investment in infrastructure. Where will this money come from? This 100 lakh crores of rupees, it can come from either domestic savings or from foreign investment. It can come from either domestic savings or foreign investment, or domestic savings or domestic borrowings. So if the government has to borrow from the domestic markets, it will have so many other negative effects, like crowding out of investment. It will also result in a very high cost of debt. The government has to borrow from domestic market means it will have very high cost of debt because interest rates in India are very high, and it will increase fiscal deficits. Government may not be able to adhere to FRBM targets. The government may not be able to adhere to FRBM targets. That is the reason why the government proposed sovereign bonds. They wanted to overcome all these problems. Sovereign bonds were proposed to overcome all these problems. On top of it, these sovereign bonds have another advantage. What is the advantage here? The global interest rates are very low. They are very low. In countries like Germany, they are negative also. The real rate of interest is negative. In United States of America, interest rates are 1 to 1.5%. So it gives opportunity for India to borrow at very low rates of interest. If India can borrow from the international markets, it results in low cost of borrowing. Our interest payments also will be very less. It will help us to borrow very cheaply. If we can borrow very cheaply, obviously, the cost of production also will be less. Our industry also can make huge amount of profits. So this is what the advantage of borrowing from international markets. And another advantage is that India's external debt position is very safe. Our component of external debt in the overall debt is very less among the BRICS countries. Component of external debt in the overall debt of our country is very less. So India can afford to borrow from international markets. We can afford to borrow from these international markets. These are all the advantages. What about the costs? The costs are, first and foremost, international markets are highly volatile. They are highly volatile in nature. Second problem is it can put a huge amount of pressure on our BOP, balance of payments. And third problem is if our rupee depreciates, which it always, if our rupee depreciates, the rupee, the external debt in terms of rupee will be very high. You have borrowed say $1 billion. Today it is with an exchange rate of 70 rupees, say it is 70 billion rupees. Tomorrow if it depreciates to 75,000, then your external debt in terms of rupee also will go up. This is another problem. Fourth problem is if external debt is high, if external debt increases, it will have negative impact on domestic currency. It can result in destabilization of our rupee also. It can have negative impact on domestic currency. Our domestic currency itself becomes highly volatile because of a high external debt. And this next problem is you have to pay this external debt in terms of again dollars only, foreign exchange only. You have to pay it in terms of foreign exchange only. Even the interest also you have to pay in terms of dollars only. It can again make our external sector vulnerable. It becomes difficult for RBI, Reserve Bank of India, to manage the foreign exchange reserves, because at present India has a healthy foreign exchange reserves. It does not mean that tomorrow the situation would be the same again. We already have experienced this foreign exchange crisis in 1991. We already had experienced foreign exchange crisis in 1991. What she called them as sovereign debt crisis. You don't want this kind of sovereign debt crisis again. And another problem is that we are taking loans. The problem is that in India, efficient utilization of loans is a major problem also. Efficient utilization because of red tapeism, bureaucracy, inefficiency, so on and so forth. It puts more burden on the country if the loans are not properly utilized. As you can see, lakhs of crores of rupees are struck in public-private partnerships. If the same thing happens with these loans also, it will put more additional burden on the country also. If you are taking loans from domestic sources, somehow you can come out with a solution. But the problem is that if you are taking loans from external sector, it will add more burden also. It makes your economy more vulnerable also. That is the reason why, even though it has been suggested many number of times, it has not been adopted in India. It was suggested many number of times by so many economists in India, but RBI and the government was not forthcoming when it comes to raising money through sovereign bonds, because of the weaknesses, because of the costs involved. So what is our conclusion? We can say that the government can definitely, on a pilot basis, they can raise some amount of money and see the utilization. If it is productively utilized, if it is helping us to finance our infrastructure, definitely we can go for sovereign bonds. But going for the sovereign bonds on a large scale in the initial days would be a risk not worth taking by the government. You can go for them for small amounts initially, see how it is being utilized, then you can go for much bigger loans also. That is what you have to write for this question. Next, I think I am expecting this kind of questions. Definitely they can be asked this year. Next, in what way Kisan is different from other schemes to alleviate the sufferings of farmers? What else should be done? So, in what way Kisan is different from other schemes? So, how it is different from other schemes? Till now, all other schemes for farmers were mostly in the form of these subsidies, what is called producer subsidies. It is in the form of say water, electricity, water, electricity, then fertilizer, and then loan subsidies, all of them. And what is the problem with these subsidies? The problem with these subsidies is that most of these subsidies are going to undeserving farmers, mostly rich farmers. They are going to mostly rich farmers. Poor farmers are not able to benefit out of these subsidies. And another problem with these subsidies is that they are also what is called production distorting subsidies. Production distorting subsidies. They are distorting the production process. Since electricity, water subsidy, electricity subsidies are given, farmers are going for what you call food crops which require huge amount of water. It is disturbing ecological equilibrium also, in a drastic decline in water tables across the country. It has a major impact on environment also. Production distorting subsidies. Now, in what way Kisan is different? Through this scheme, the government is transferring cash into the accounts of farmers. It is transferring cash into the accounts of farmers. It gives freedom to the farmers to decide regarding how they can spend money. It gives freedom to the farmers to decide. All earlier subsidies were what is called conditional subsidies, conditional transfers. All earlier subsidies were conditional transfers. Whereas this income support scheme is unique in the sense that it gives freedom to the farmers, regarding how to spend the money. They don't have to spend the money on, say, fertilizer subsidies. They don't have to spend money on, irrigation or electricity. They can spend that money the way they like. Second thing with the Kisan is that it reaches all farmers, mostly poor farmers. It benefits poor farmers. Initially, the Kisan was only for small and marginal farmers. Later, it was extended to all farmers also. It benefits small and marginal farmers, whereas earlier subsidy schemes mostly benefited rich, powerful farmers. Whereas Kisan is one scheme which is benefiting poor farmers, small and marginal farmers. Next, this kind of income subsidy, this income transfer also will not come under any kind of WTO guidelines also, because it is not distorting production processes. It will not come under WTO regulations. This kind of income transfer will not come under WTO regulations. Why? Because they are not distorting the production processes. What is the problem with India with regard to WTO? WTO is saying that the kind of subsidies India is giving to its farmers, it is resulting in distortion of production processes, and more importantly, it is artificially reducing the cost of production, giving Indian farmers unfair advantage in the international market. That is the reason why now the government is giving money directly to the farmers, so it does not come under the WTO regulations. That is what another advantage with this one. Next, next important, third or fourth, whatever may be the point. The next point is, there is less scope for corruption here. There is less scope for corruption. If you take the case of fertilizer subsidies, the government, if you look at this year's budget, government is spending 80,000 crores of rupees on fertilizer subsidies, out of which almost 65,000 crores of rupees is going into the hands of inefficient public sector enterprises who produce these fertilizers. Farmers are getting only 15,000 crores of rupees. Farmers are getting only 15,000 crores of rupees. This kind of inefficient subsidies could be overcome with the help of Kisan. You can make subsidies more efficient, and more importantly, you can also reduce corruption. You can also reduce corruption also, because maximum amount of corruption takes place in these subsidy regimes only. The money is directly transferred into the accounts of the farmers using DBT, direct benefit transfers, and also using Jan Dhan, Aadhaar and mobile. It reduces corruption. It makes subsidies more efficient also. It makes subsidies more efficient also. Whereas here, maximum amount of money is going into the hands of corrupt, inefficient fertilizer companies. That is what another advantage with Kisan. This is another advantage with Kisan. But the question here is that, is Kisan sufficient? It is necessary but not at all sufficient. It is necessary but not at all sufficient. Why? Because ultimately in the agriculture sector, what should the government do? The government should focus on improving infrastructure. He should focus on improving infrastructure. He should focus on improving infrastructure. Public investment in agriculture, it has come down drastically over a period of time. Public investment in agriculture has come down drastically over a period of time. What do you mean by public investment in agriculture? You are talking about government investment in irrigation. You are talking about government investment in warehouses. You are talking about government investment in cold storage houses. You are talking about government investment in marketing facilities. Government investment in transportation and communication facilities. What you call agricultural extension services. It had come down drastically since 1980s. Since 1980s. So Kisan at best can be a short-term measure. It can be a short-term measure. To alleviate the sufferings of farmers, it cannot provide a permanent solution to their problems. It cannot provide a permanent solution to their problems. What is the permanent solution? The government must improve investment in agriculture, public investment in agriculture. This is what you will be writing for this question. Next, economic growth is stagnating due to decline in demand. Discuss the measures to revive both consumption and investment demand. So, for any economy to develop, what is required is a demand. What is required is demand. Because the producers will produce only when there is demand for their products in the international market. For any economy to develop, what is required is this demand. And in the last few quarters, in fact in the last few years, if you look at India, economic growth is coming down. It has stagnated and it is coming down also. In the last quarter it is said that it was 5.8%. It can be less this quarter also. It is coming down, it is stagnating. What is the reason why? Because of lack of demand. And this demand, the question says that this demand can be revived with the help of what is called consumption demand and investment demand. Because when you look at demand, how can demand be revived in the economic system? One is consumption demand of individuals. Second one is investment demand of entrepreneurs, industrialists. Third one is government demand, government expenditure. And fourth one is external sector. Fourth one is external sector. The question is about these two things, consumption demand and investment demand. How to revive this consumption demand and investment demand. As economic survey says, rural demand has come down in the last 1 year or so. Rural demand has come down because rural incomes also have come down. Why rural incomes have come down? Because of agrarian crisis. So, the question is how to revive this demand. First, let us look at consumption demand. How to revive consumption demand? How to revive consumption demand? When can people demand? Only when they have income. Only when they have what you call disposable income. When they have disposable income. So when can people have more income? Only when the government spends money. When government spends money or when they have jobs. The problem is that we are witnessing jobless growth also. This is also another problem also. So the government has to spend money, and next they can also have money only when the government reduces taxes also. Only when the government reduces taxes also. This is another way you can revive the consumption demand. So first thing is that government has to spend more. When the government is spending more, for example, government should be spending more on schemes like NREGA, so that more income will be in the hands of people in rural areas. The government has to spend more money on these developmental welfare schemes. Second thing, as we have said, the government should focus on creating jobs. It is very difficult. Immediately it cannot be done. You cannot create jobs overnight. So the third thing what the government can do is, it can reduce the taxes. For example, if the government reduces say taxes on petroleum products, it will result in more income in the hands of the people. Now the problem here is that when the government is increasing the taxes on these petroleum products or any other taxes also, there will be more money in the hands of the government. But for the government to spend that money, it requires some gestation period also. And this gestation period is also resulting in more stagnation. On the other hand, if the government reduces the taxes today, immediately tomorrow people have more money in their hands. What is called disposable income. So if you were to be economic advisor to the government, this is what you would suggest to the government. If you want to revive demand, reduce taxes. It might result in loss of revenue for the government in the short term, but it will have more benefits in the form of revival of demand. The government must reduce the taxes. On the other hand, what the government is doing, it is increasing more taxes. That is where the problem is. And unfortunately, government expenditure is mostly unproductive in nature. So it will not revive your demand. Government expenditures will be unproductive. So that is the reason why it is said that the government has to reduce the taxes, so that it can put more money in the hands of the people also. Next, what else can be used to revive this rural demand? Banks will have to lend more loans to people. Banks have to lend more loans to people. They have to lend more loans to people. Now what happened? This collapse of ILFS has resulted in the collapse of these NBFCs also. This created a lot of credit crunch also in the market. It is a cyclical process. Everything is cyclical process. ILFS and the other NBFCs have taken more loans from the commercial banks, because of which commercial banks are facing problems of liquidity. They are facing problems of liquidity, and which is impacting the ability of the banks to give loans to individual consumers also. So people don't have money. People don't have money to buy what is called durable commodities, goods and services. And another problem is that why demand is coming down is because if you look at this CPI, Consumer Price Index, especially for the essential items like food, it has come down. The CPI, especially for basic food items, it has come down due to depression in global food prices also, because of which there is less money in the hands of farmers also. Farmer incomes also have depressed. They have seen a rapid decline due to decline in food prices also. The government also has not increased the MSP because they do not want any food inflation. So the government also must look to ways to increase more remuneration, to ensure better remunerative prices for farmers. As we said, doubling of farmer income, that is also another important thing the government must be doing. This is what another thing that can be done to revive the rural demand, this consumption demand. What about investment demand? What can the government do to revive investment demand? First and foremost, these repo rates and reverse repo rates should be reduced. India is one of those countries with a very high real rate of interest. It is one of those countries with a very high real rate of interest. At present, India can afford to have repo rates of around 4%. At present, what is the reverse repo rate? After the recent reduction by RBI, what is the repo rate? 5.2, 5.3%, I think. Yes, it can come down to 4% also. Because still, as I said, our real rate of interest is very, very high compared to developed countries. It can be done. And another problem here is that even RBI is reducing the rates. Banks are not passing the same to the customers, consumers. So the measures should be taken to ensure that banks will pass on the benefits to the final consumers also. This is one of the ways. You have to take. When the situation is serious, you cannot go for incrementalism. You have to talk about some revolutionary measures. RBI still believes in incrementalism only. They are slowly reducing the repo rates, not in tune with the market conditions. They must reduce drastically the repo rates. They should be brought down to 4% or even 3.5% also, taking into consideration our inflation. This is one important thing that they have to do. Second thing that can be done is, what the government should be doing is that governments must reduce these taxes, especially these customs and excise duties. They must reduce these customs and excise duties. In the name of protectionism, the government has started imposing huge amount of taxes. At present, our tax regime is like what it was in 1991, prior to reforms. Too many taxes. Especially the government is imposing taxes on inputs, the raw material and the technology and the machinery which is necessary for export promotion industries, because of which these export promotion industries also have become very stagnant. So the government must take the measures to reduce taxes. Third thing is the GST. GST rates are very, very high. India is one of those countries with a very high tax regime. For example, automobile sector recently had requested the government that GST on automobiles should be reduced from 28 to 18%. It has to be done. GST rates are very, very high. That is what the government should also do to revive investment demand. Next, what else should the government do to revive this investment demand? What else can be done by the government? The next thing the government should do is ensure more credit flow into the markets. Recently in the budget, has provisions to ensure more credit flow into the markets, especially this NBFCs which have been destroyed because of the collapse of IFLS. They should be given more credit also, easy credit. Recently budget also has some provisions for that, wherein commercial banks are allowed to invest in NBFCs also. That is what the next thing that the government can do to revive investment demand. The next thing what the government can do to revive investment demand. What else can the government do to revive investment demand? What else do you think to revive investment demand? This insolvency and bankruptcy code, IBC, it should be implemented very fast, so that those dead assets can be used for productive purposes again. IBC, insolvency and bankruptcy code. The dead assets which have been struck in those public-private partnerships, they can be monetized so that the money can be used for fresh investments also. Otherwise, what is happening is evergreening of loans is taking place. Banks NPAs are going up, they are not willing to give fresh loans also. IBC should be implemented very fast. This is what another thing that can be done. Next thing is banking sector reforms. Banking sector reforms also. Banking sector reforms. So all these things are required to make sure that we are able to revive this investment demand. Let us assume that our finance minister also listens to these things, because that is very, very important. You can see the signs are very much clear that economy is not only stagnating, it has getting into the mode of recession. Not only that, at the global level also there are fears that again we are getting back to global recession, because the global GDP growth rate was estimated to be around 3.3%, and now the estimates have been revised to 2.8% also. So when the economy, the global economy also getting into recession, it will have much more adverse impact on India. So India has to be proactive rather than waiting for the global recession to take shape. We should be proactive to revive our economy, because we cannot expect much turnaround at the global level to revive our investment demand. It has to be done through domestic demand. In the last 25 years or so, for the first time in the last 25 years, the domestic consumption demand had come down for the first time in the last quarter, showing the seriousness of the problem also. As I said, the government must be what is called, what John Maynard Keynes calls it as, it should follow expansionary fiscal policies. On the one hand, the government must spend more amount of money. On the other hand, it must also reduce taxes. The government need not worry about adhering to FRBM provisions also, because when the economy is in recession, you cannot be talking about FRBM provisions. So this is what you have to write. Next, even though fiscal deficit declined in recent times, revenue deficit remains a major worry. Discuss the reasons for rising revenue deficits and suggest measures. One question will be asked from budget. So I think revenue deficits is one important area which UPSC has not touched for a long time. So they can ask about this. So we are very good, at least we are sincere in reducing our fiscal deficits. If you go by FRBM Act in 2003, it has said that we should reduce our fiscal deficit to 3% of our GDP, whereas revenue deficit should be reduced to 0% of our GDP. Now, as part of FRBM Act, the government is only mostly focusing on fiscal deficit. But the most important component of the deficit is not fiscal deficit, it is revenue deficit. It is very dangerous also, this revenue deficit. What revenue deficit clearly shows is that the government is living beyond its means. It is living beyond its means. The government is living beyond its means. And revenue deficit, India is still very, very high. If you look at the last 3 years of revenue deficit, it was 2.6%, and then later it was 2.2%, and this year it is estimated at 2.3%. And the government is expecting that it will come down to 1.6% and 1.2% later in the next 2 years. But from 2.3%, can it come down? Very, very difficult. So what are the reasons why we are not able to reduce our revenue deficits? First and foremost, from the revenue side, the problem is stagnation in the revenues, tax revenues. Both direct taxes and indirect taxes, especially with the implementation of GST. With the implementation of GST, this indirect tax revenues are not up to the mark. What the government expected. In the recent budget also, in the revised estimates submitted by the government to the parliament, the tax revenues were not up to the mark. The government was not able to get maximum amount of taxes, maximum amount of revenues from both direct as well as indirect taxes. When can the tax revenues be high? Tax revenues will be high only when there is what is called a tax buoyancy. That means when the GDP increases, automatically you can expect more tax revenues also. You can have more tax revenues either in two ways. One is when GDP increases, automatically tax revenues also will go up. Second one is by increasing tax rates. And what the government has done, the government had opted for this one, increasing tax rates in recent times to mop up tax revenues. Especially in this year's budget, the government has imposed super rich tax also. The government thought that it would compensate for loss in tax revenues by increasing tax rates. And similarly, as I said, the government also, in case of indirect taxes, started imposing so many taxes on imports, customs and excise duties. And not only that, the government also increased taxes on petroleum products also in the budget. But this way of raising tax revenues is dangerous because it can slow down economic activity and it can send economy into recession also. That is the reason why this is not a better way of raising tax revenues. If at all you want to raise tax revenues, make sure that your GDP is going up. And this is where the government should be focusing on. The basic problem is that we are not able to raise revenues. And then on the expenditure side, this is where the problem for the government is. On the expenditure side, if you look at it, on the expenditure side, the government has simply failed to control its revenue expenditure. It could not control its revenue expenditure. There are some aspects of revenue expenditure over which the government cannot do anything. For example, interest payments. Interest payments keep on going up, they keep on going, they keep on increasing as long as the government takes fresh loans. So, these interest payments are directly related to fiscal deficit. If your fiscal deficit is going up, automatically interest payments also will be very high. That is one reason. Next one is the most important reason why the government is not able to reduce its revenue deficit is subsidies. Subsidies. The government is giving too many subsidies in the name of welfare state, and it is spending a lot of money on these subsidies. Most of the money is going into unproductive purposes, subsidies. Especially take the case of if you look at the PDS, 1.8 lakh crores. In this year's budget it is almost 2.25 lakh crores on PDS. Obviously, the government is not able to contain the subsidies. On top of it, instead of reducing subsidies, the government has increased its expenditure on welfare with more schemes like Kisan. It has increased its welfare expenditure with schemes like Ayushman Bharat, with schemes like Kisan and Ayushman Bharat, which has only added more to the revenue expenditure of the government, which added more, because the number of centrally sponsored schemes have increased in recent times instead of being reduced. So the government is not able to ensure fiscal discipline, because of which the revenue deficits are not coming down at all. They are not coming down at all. That is the reason why nowadays you can see that in the budget, in the financial statement also, the finance minister never talks about reducing the revenue deficits. One of the key components of FRBM Act is that we should reduce our revenue deficits to 0% of GDP. By 2009, we are in 2019. There is no point of talking about these things. Right now, the entire focus of the government is only on reducing fiscal deficits, whereas revenue deficit is much more dangerous than fiscal deficit. Why? Because revenue deficit immediately adds to inflation also. It is highly unproductive, it adds to inflation. So what can be done by the government to reduce revenue deficits? What can be done by the government to reduce revenue deficits? The government should focus on one hand, as I said, increasing its revenues, on the other hand, reducing its expenditure. So, better targeting of subsidies, then identifying beneficiaries of these schemes of the government. For example, if you go by this committee on poverty, if you go by this committees, there are 22.5% of people are living below poverty line. But under PDS, 67% of our population is getting food subsidies. So who is this remaining the gap? And who is part of this 45% almost? Obviously, people who do not deserve these subsidies are getting these subsidies. The government must identify proper beneficiaries. Mostly political populism dominates. Recently, the government has said that they have removed so many fake ration cards. Fake ration cards were removed, by aligning this ration cards with Aadhaar. But it cannot be seen in reduction in subsidies. If the government had removed, as the government has claimed, more than around 90 lakh, I think 9 lakh fake ration cards were removed. If that is the case, the food subsidies should have come down, but it did not come down. Why? Because, as I said, you require tough measures. Political populism is dominating when it comes to welfare administration in India. That is where the government. Similarly, take something like Food Corporation of India. It should be privatized, or it should be closed down. And similarly, fertilizer subsidies. As I said, this year fertilizer subsidies are 80,000 crores, out of which only 15,000 crores are going into the hands of farmers. Instead of giving these subsidies, what the government can do is government can opt for DBT, direct benefit transfers, so that it can reduce the subsidies. Because unless the government reduces the revenue deficits, there is very little money left with the government to be spent on capital expenditure. Unless there is capital expenditure, it is not possible to revive the economic system also. You require fiscal discipline. The government has to take tough measures. It has to take politically unpopular measures. Whether the government is ready to take these measures or not, that we will have to see. So, next, India ranks first in milk production, but it has not benefited the farmers. Analyze. This year again I am expecting this dairy farming question as far as agriculture is concerned, agriculture and allied sectors are concerned. Last year the question was about National Horticulture Mission. So this year the question can be about dairy farming. So basically what the question says is that, when we have adopted this white revolution, in 1990s, what was the outcome? The outcome was, India has become now the largest producer of milk in the world. At present, we are producing almost 18.5% of overall milk production is coming from India. Global milk production, it is coming from India, 18.5%. Next, it is almost 9.4 lakh crores industry. This milk industry is 9.4 lakh crore industry, and it is almost growing at every year 15% per annum. The growth is also very high. Growing at 15% per annum. And this has become major problem also for India. Why? Because we have excess production. Excess production compared to the demand. We have excess production. So what is happening is that milk is what we call part of perishable commodities. Milk is part of perishable commodities. And if you look at India and compare it to the rest of the world, in the rest of the world at the global level, this entire dairy industry, in the rest of the world, the dairy industry was or is dominated by multinational companies. In the rest of the world, this dairy industry is dominated by multinational companies. Whereas if you look at India, it is still dominated by small farmers. It is still dominated by small farmers. And the problem for farmers is that they don't have any storage facilities. Our farmers suffer because of absence of supply chain management. Absence of supply chain management. Supply chain management. Farmers are selling their milk to middlemen. A farmer is there, he is selling the milk to middlemen, who in turn sells the milk to these corporates or cooperatives. And from there it will come to the consumers, final consumers. This is what is called supply chain management. From farmers to the middlemen to the cooperatives or corporates and to the final consumer. And what is happening here? Before it is coming to the final consumer, these corporates and cooperatives, what do? They come out with so many milk products. Not only milk, milk based products like curd, then butter, then chocolates and other products. The thing here is that these products are extremely costly compared to raw milk. These products are very costly compared to raw milk. For example, if 1 liter of milk is say 40 rupees, 1 liter of curd is very, very high. They are very costly. And this is the corporates here and these cooperatives which are making huge amount of profits with very less investment. They are sending their middlemen to farmers in villages, collecting the milk and at very cheap rates. And farmers are forced to sell the milk because they have so much of excess milk, they don't have any cold storage facilities also. They don't have any cold storage facilities. So they cannot store the milk with themselves. For how long, what is the life of a milk? Maximum, 24 to 48 hours. So farmers cannot store the milk for more than 24 hours or 48 hours. So they are forced to sell the milk to the middlemen. And these middlemen would in turn, sell them to the cooperatives and the corporates who are making huge amounts of profits by selling it to the final consumers in the form of different milk-based products. In the process, the farmers are not benefiting. Why? Because, as we have said, supply chain management is absent in India. Supply chain management is absent in India. And as I said, again, thanks to white revolution, we are producing a lot of milk also than what is necessary. Obviously, because of which the prices are always depressed. The global milk prices also had come down in recent times. At the global level also, dairy sector had seen recession, which had impacted Indian farmers also. Global milk prices. We are talking about at the level of the producer. At the level of the producer, they are coming down, not at the level of final consumer. Final consumer. At the level of the producers, they have come down. It is bought not at the level of final consumer. And who is making profits in the whole process? It is these middlemen along with the cooperatives and corporates. Now that we know the problem, what is the solution? What should be the solution? First, the government must encourage these farmers to come together and form cooperatives, milk cooperatives, like what is in Anand, Gujarat, to form milk cooperatives. And the government must ensure that they have better storage facilities and other facilities. And then these cooperatives must have direct contact with the final consumers. They must have direct contact with the final consumers. And the government should also help these cooperatives to produce milk based products also. Not only selling fresh milk, but also milk based products, butter, ghee, and then curd and chocolates, you name it. All these products must be produced by these cooperatives, milk cooperatives. For that, government must provide liberal financial assistance. It must also give training to them as part of Skill India. Skill India does not only mean computers, Skill India means all these things. The government should also help them to buy the necessary machinery also by reducing taxes on them. So that these producers can benefit out of the whole process. Otherwise, as you can see, these Amul and other companies, they are making huge amount of profits at the cost of the producers. The same thing happening with any other sector in India because of absence of supply side management, supply chain management. Again, as I said, I am expecting this question in this year examination. Next, a frequent occurrence of droughts is a reflection of a failure of disaster management in India. It is a reflection of a failure of disaster management in India. Why frequent occurrence of droughts? If you look at it, 16% of our total area, 16% of our total land area is prone to droughts. And 68% of our sown area, the area that is under cultivation, this is important. 68% of our area under cultivation is prone to droughts. And almost 300 million people are affected by droughts. 300 million people are affected by droughts. And 35% of our area receives less than 1125 mm rainfall, which is what is called drought prone area. Drought prone area. So, when the statistics are like this, and what are the states in India which are prone to droughts? What are the states in India which are prone to droughts? Rajasthan, Maharashtra, Karnataka, Telangana, Tamil Nadu, and parts of Gujarat. In the western, central and southern parts of the country are prone to more droughts. These are the states where we see lots of droughts. And then the problem is that in India maximum amount of rainfall is there only in the what is the season of rainfall in India? Between June to August. A maximum amount of rainfall is there in between June to August. And unfortunately, this distribution of rainfall is not even, and most of the time it is not properly evenly distributed also. This is what the problem is. One is why we have so much onset of rainfall is always late, arrival of monsoon, delay in arrival of monsoons. This is one of the reasons. Next, insufficient rainfall in the month of July. Even this year also, if you look at it, it was more than 30% deficit in the month of July. Insufficient rainfall in the month of July. And then next, because of this insufficient rainfall, increase in the price of fodder. prices of water will go up. Next, it will also dry up rural drinking water also. There is no drinking water available in rural areas. Next, normal monsoon has become very rare. That is the reason why our meteorological department had come out with a new term, near normal monsoon. What is this near normal? We don't know, but they came out with this kind of fancy terms, near normal monsoon. Normal monsoon has become a rarity, and then only 45% of our area is irrigated. 45% of area is irrigated. So, next problem here is that unwillingness on the part of the state governments to declare their states or areas as drought prone areas. State governments do not simply want to declare droughts. Why they don't want to declare droughts? Why they don't want to declare droughts? Why? Because it means that they are accepting their failure in providing relief. It is politically unpopular. These are all very sensitive things which impact the people. No state government wants to accept that there are severe droughts in their state or in their districts. No district collector wants to say that people died because of famine and droughts. In case of floods, everyone can see it, but in case of droughts, it takes place over a period of time. By the time we recognize, the damage has already been done also. Even 2 years back, Supreme Court had to intervene and force the state governments and central government to declare drought. Even central government also never declares any drought seasons. Central government always says that this year again we have near normal monsoon. They never declare. 2 years back, Supreme Court had come down heavily on state and central governments for their reluctance to declare droughts also. It has said that when 13 states and 30 crore people are affected, 13 states and 30 crore people are affected, the central and state governments are not willing to declare a season of drought in agriculture. That is why, because I said that it is politically unpopular. In case of floods, everyone can see it, but the problem with the droughts is that before we recognize, the season will also pass out. In the last few years, as you can see, agriculture output also has come down. We have seen huge amount of variations in agriculture output also. Sometimes it went back to negative output also. This year also again they are expecting the same, because as we study in some other questions, we have seen huge amount of variations in the climate in the last 2 months. So this is what the problem is. Now what should be done for this drought management? What can be done? In India, like with any other aspects of disaster management, drought management is also mostly reactive in nature. It is mostly reactive in nature. It is mostly reactive in nature. For example, if you look at in the last 54 years, in 18 years, the country faced drought-like situations. Once in 3 years. In 18 years, the country had witnessed a drought-like situation with a significant fall in food output and farm incomes. With significant fall in food grains output and fall in agricultural incomes. 18 out of 4 years. Does it means that you think that the government must have a long-term strategy to tackle the droughts. Unfortunately, in spite of we have this NDMA, National Disaster Management Authority, but NDMA has not come out with any national plan to prevent droughts and famines. We don't have any national plan to prevent droughts. As we say, keep on saying, disaster management can be successful only when it is proactive in nature. It can be successful only when it is proactive in nature. Even NDMA Act had come into existence in 2005. In the last 14 years, the government never really bothered to come out with a national plan for drought management. It has not come out with any national plan. So what should the government do? As part of solution, the government must come out with a comprehensive plan to manage droughts and famines. First, the government must come out with a comprehensive plan. Second, the government must use technology. It must use technology to predict monsoons in a more accurate manner. Monsoons in a more accurate manner. Third, it should identify drought-prone regions. It should identify these drought-prone regions. Fourth, it should involve the local self-governments and NGOs in disaster management plans. Next, fifth, it should encourage farmers in these areas to opt for dry land agriculture. It should encourage farmers in these areas to opt for dry land agriculture. Next, it should ensure sufficient supply of fodder for cattle. Sufficient supply of fodder for cattle, provided Lalu Prasad Yadav is not there. Otherwise, he will eat everything. He will not leave anything to. Right now he is in jail, so we can think about all these things. Ensure sufficient fodder. Next, it should, as on a long-term basis, it should focus more on improving groundwater table. Groundwater tables through rain harvesting measures. Rain harvesting measures. We are only using only 8% of our total rainfall. Rainfall. The government should focus on this rain harvest. Next, the government must also encourage alternative professions in rural areas. So that farmers are not deprived of their livelihood. Alternative professions in rural areas, so that they are not deprived of their livelihood. This is what you can write for this question. Next, come to the next question. India's internal security challenge depends on how it tackles the deviation of youth being psychologically controlled by people who threaten internal security. So, what do you understand by this question? What have you understood by this question? If you again look at the pattern of questions asked by UPSC in the last 3-4 years, if you look at economy, on an average they are asking 8 to 10 questions. Out of 20 questions, economy they are asking around 8 to 10 questions, sometimes 7 to 10 also, 7 or 8 to 10 questions, economy. Then internal security, in the section A and section B combined together, they are asking sometimes a minimum 2 to even 5 questions also, 4 to 5 questions they are asking. Last year they have asked a lot of questions from internal security, before last year. And disaster management. In disaster management, again around 2 to 3 or 4 questions they are asking. Science and technology and environment, remaining questions around 5 questions. Sometimes they are asking more also, like last year they have asked more questions from environment and science and technology. That is what the distribution. But again, as I said, they are changing the mixture here, the mix of questions here. Before last year, that is 2017, they have asked more questions from economy, they have asked management and internal security, and less number of questions from science and technology and environment. But last year they have asked more number of questions from science and tech and environment and less number of questions from economy. So this year you can again expect them to ask more questions from economy. Why? Because the fact that Indian economy is experiencing so many problems, and you can also expect more questions from disaster management also because of the kind of disasters that a country is facing. You can expect internal security. You know, you can expect again some more questions from internal security, because internal security, what are the questions normally they will ask? They will ask questions about terrorism, cyber security, Naxalism, cross-border migration. These are all the things which are standard questions. So they can go a little bit beyond also. You know, they can ask questions about, for example, this year, you know, I don't know whether I have given that question or not. I think I have given it, but I have removed it later. Okay. Yeah, I think it is there. You know, this Article 370 and Article 35A. You know, what is the impact of removal of Article 370 and Article 35A? These are all the current topics. And another topic is, as I have given here, it is, you know, basically this young people in our country, they are being radicalized by external forces to turn against India. The best example is in the Pulwama attacks. Who were the terrorists? Mostly from India only. It was not externally sponsored terror act. It was mostly India only. They have been radicalized, you know, by the external forces. Their brains have been radicalized by the external forces. That is what the question says. India's internal security challenge depends on how it tackles the deviation of youth being psychologically controlled by people who threaten our internal security. That is what the reason why I have asked this question. So now coming back here, as we have said, two things here. One is the young people who are being radicalized in the name of religion, the youth who are being radicalized in the name of religion. Second one is, you know, how to bring back those people. You know, how to bring back those people who are already radicalized. How to bring back them to mainstream society. How to bring back them to mainstream society. These two things. One is how to prevent people from getting radicalized. Second one is how to bring back those people who are already being radicalized to mainstream, you know, society. These are the two major internal security challenges the country is facing. Because at the end of the day, you know, you can have as many security forces as you want, but with the kind of developments that are taking place in science and technology, it is almost impossible to protect your borders unless your own people are, you know, committed to the safety and security of your country. Right now what is happening is that in places like Jammu and Kashmir or in other places, this radicalization is taking place in the name of religion, in the name of region also. Radicalization of young people is taking place, whether it is terrorism or whether it is Naxalism. You know, this radicalization is taking place in the name of either terrorism or Naxalism, or in northeastern states it is secessionist movements. So how to prevent this radicalization? You know, what kind of long-term plans we have to prevent this radicalization? What can be done? So we have to identify the reasons of why, you know, they are being, their brains are being washed, their brains are being, you know, manipulated. What are the reasons why? You know, what can be done to prevent this radicalization? You know, why? Because, you know, one of the important things is that the country obviously is facing problems related to equitable growth, because you know, young people are not getting sufficient opportunities to become part of a growth and development process. the country is witnessing what we call this jobless growth, wherein people are forced to think that unless they become part of this terrorist movements, their demands would not be met. That is where the problem. And then high levels of corruption in our society. It forces the people to become radicalized. High levels of corruption. And another thing is that why they are getting radicalized, because the development of rapid developments that have taken place in science and technology. Someone sitting in Pakistan, they can communicate with you using Facebook, WhatsApp and other social media platforms to radicalize your minds. You can become a jihadi through their words. That is what Zakir Naik and other people have done. That is what people sitting in Pakistan will do with to our youth in Jammu and Kashmir and other places in the name of religion. For example, the best one is the ISIS. What is the difference between ISIS and Al Qaeda? What is the difference between ISIS and Al Qaeda? Al Qaeda is a structured organization with a proper hierarchy and everything else. You have people at the top, they will collect the money and they will indulge in terror activities. You know where Al Qaeda exists. You can attack their camps and kill those people. Whereas in case of ISIS, the problem is ISIS is more of an idea than anything else. What is the idea here? The idea here is bringing back what they call Khalifa. The rule of Khalifa, the Middle Age Islam, what is called Wahhabi Islam. So they don't have any headquarters, they don't have any leaders. It is spread widely in different parts of the world, and they mostly inspire and motivate people through social media. That is where the problem is. I remember this question was asked as part of internal security 2 years back also. The same question. Why? Because how can you, the person sitting in Bangladesh and he will be communicating with, you people here in India. He will be, slowly but surely poisoning their minds, saying that if you sacrifice yourself for the sake of God, you will go to heaven. They become deadly. Any amount of internal security measures cannot help you to prevent these kind of terror attacks. That is where the question says, you must do something to prevent these kind of events from happening. What can be done? What should be done? Otherwise, again the country will be facing, because the kind of challenges the country faces on socio-economic side can always result in these kind of movements also. So what should be done? What can the government do? We say that it has to implement so many reforms. First and foremost, the government must reform the criminal justice system. For example, recently you can see this Pehlu Khan murder. Rajasthan High Court acquitted everyone. Obviously, this kind of this kind of judiciary and the criminal justice system will make people lose confidence in the democracy. That is more, that will make them to turn towards this radical elements, saying that we cannot get justice in the present democratic setup in India. You must reform your criminal justice systems. Next, we must focus on improving our cyber security. Prevent cyber crimes and focus on improving cyber security. Is it possible for the government to go through all the WhatsApp and social media posts? It is not possible, but the government has to somehow have some kind of control over this cyber media. Very, very important. Next thing the government must do is that it must prevent money laundering, because for all these terror organizations, finances are very, very important. And how they are getting the money? Through money laundering. Again, the question was asked last year or before last year, the link between money laundering and terrorism also. So we must ensure that all these organizations, both within the country and outside the country, should have absolutely no financial resources, by implementing strong measures to prevent money laundering with the help of global multilateral organizations also. Next thing is, the government must prevent the unholy nexus between police, criminals and politicians. It must prevent this unholy nexus between police, criminals and politicians. This is what again the government should be doing. So that is what basically we call, the government must ensure strict implementation of rule of law in both letter and spirit, so that young people in our country will have more faith in their democratic systems, so that they are not radicalized. Very, very important. And then, as I said, de-radicalization process also should take place. Recently in Maharashtra, you must have heard about it, in the police of Maharashtra have opened this de-radicalization centers also. That is also you have to do. So these are the steps which you have to take, to ensure internal security. Next, the other questions are about science and technology, and all of them are important from this year's examination point of view. Cryptocurrency and security issues, then DNA profiling also important, and what are the major factors responsible for loss of biodiversity also, because nowadays UPSC is focusing asking these kind of questions. Next, come to the part B. Jobless growth is a phenomenon that country witnessed since liberalization of economy in 1991. Discuss the reasons for the same and suggest feasible reforms. Again, whether we like it or not, this year this jobless growth is going to be very, very important question from the examination point of view. We have talked about it as part of a essay also, and I cannot see why they cannot ask the same thing in your general studies paper 3 also. Definitely it will be asked either as part of your essay or in general studies paper 3 also. If you are writing in paper 3, you have to be more specific, because you have to write only in 250 words. So what are the, how do you start your answer? You start your answer with the statistics. According to NSSO, unemployment rate in the country is the highest in the last 45 years. It is the highest in the last 45 years. That is what it says. It is 6.1%. It is 6.1%. And more than that, the details are more important. A maximum number of people are unemployed in the age group of 15 to 29. Maximum people are unemployed are in the age group of between 15 to 29. And in urban areas, it has affected 27.2% of urban women, 27.2% of urban women, whereas 18.7% of urban men, 18.7% of urban men. When it comes to rural areas, it is 13.4% for women and 17.1% for men. 13.6% for women and 17.4% for men. So this is where the problem is, mostly in this 15 to 29 category. Yes. Yes, are unemployed in urban areas and 18.7 in urban men. This is rural areas. Obviously, because in rural areas people also work less. In rural areas people also, they don't, they depend mostly on agriculture. That is the reason why. So, what are the reasons why we are witnessing this jobless growth in the past few years? First one is this demonetization. Implementation of demonetization and GST successively. Implementation of demonetization and GST. It has impacted the economic growth. It has also impacted employment also. Maximum number of people have lost their jobs because of GST and demonetization. Next, in the recent times, what are the other reasons why people and failure of agriculture. When agriculture has failed, obviously those who are employed with the agriculture had to find jobs in the other sectors. Third, manufacturing sector, which provides good amount of employment, had become stagnant. Why manufacturing sector had become stagnant? Because of global economic conditions as well as because of GST and demonetization also. Manufacturing sector. 4, rest of the problems are what you call structural problems, long term problems. Next one is this service sector contributes maximum to our GDP, and this service sector is not labor intensive. It is mostly capital intensive, service sector. Next, there is huge amount of gap between the demand and the supply in the labor market. Gap between demand and supply in the labor market. That is, what is demanded by industry is different from the skills possessed by individuals. Huge amount of gap between demand and supply. Next, rigid labor laws prevents industrialists from employing people. They prefer contract employment rather than permanent employment. Rigid labor laws are coming in the way of more employment opportunities for people. Next reason why we are witnessing this jobless growth. Next reason is, as we say, I think we have mentioned agriculture. Yeah, agriculture we have mentioned. Another reason why we are witnessing jobless growth our failure to develop a tourism sector, which has huge amount of job potential. Our failure to develop tourism sector, which has huge amount of potential for jobs. So then, what are the reforms can we suggest here? What are the reforms can we suggest here? First and foremost, labor reforms. Labor reforms are required. The organizations, the company should be given freedom to hire and fire people. At present, it becomes difficult to fire people. That is the reason why they don't want to employ also in the first place. Labor reforms are required. Second, what can the government can do immediately? What can the first, we are looking at what the government can do immediately in the present, then we can look for long-term solutions also. Next, what can the government do? The government must end this protection given to small scale industries. As economic survey says, perverse incentives. It must end protection given to the small scale industries. Third, the government should focus on MSMEs, medium and small scale, and I should focus on MSMEs, which are more labor intensive. We should focus on these industries, so that there will be fourth, the government should revive manufacturing sector. How can the government revive manufacturing sector? By giving tax subsidies, by giving tax incentives, tax subsidies. And by reducing red tape. Next, what the government can do is, government must integrate all the flagship schemes. What are the flagship schemes? Skill India, Startup India, Make in India, and one more scheme is there. I think Stand Up India is also there. Yes, it must integrate all these schemes. Next, the government should focus on NREGA 2.0. NREGA 2.0 should focus on improving skills. So what the government can do is that half the amount of money to be spent on NREGA can be clubbed with the Skill India program. NREGA 2.0. So that as we keep on saying, government cannot create employment for people. What the government should focus is on, it should focus more on creating employers rather than creating employment. That is what we say. We should focus on creating employers than on creating employment. NREGA creates employment but not employers. So that is the reason why through NREGA give more people more skills and give them money, and also make them part of Make in India and Stand Up India, all these programs. Create more employers. This is what the government should do. Next, the government should encourage the tourism sector. Identify tourist spots and encourage tourism sector. It should encourage tourism sector also. These are the things which the government can do immediately. These are all the things which are in the hands of the government immediately to ensure what we call job-led growth. In the long term, what the government can do? In the long term, the government must see how to reduce or eliminate disguised unemployment in agriculture sector. 50% of our population still is dependent on agriculture for their survival. It is not required. Disguised unemployment in agriculture sector. The government must take away the excess labor from the agriculture sector. Next, the government should ensure proper linkages between industry and academic institutions. Proper linkages between industry and academic institutions, so that the gap between the demand and the supply can be reduced. Industry and academic institutions. This is what the government can do. Next, the government must encourage rural entrepreneurs. At present, if you look at these programs, Startup India and Skill India, Make in India, it is mostly focusing in urban areas, educated. The government must encourage rural entrepreneurs in the long term, rural entrepreneurships. Next, next thing is, government should increase its expenditure on infrastructure, capital expenditure. Expenditure on infrastructure, capital expenditure, so that it can generate employment also. It can generate employment also. This is what you have to write for this question. How to ensure job-led growth. As I said, all these points you can write in your essay paper also. I am expecting definitely either in economy or essay. It should come. Next, investment in railways can help in boosting economic growth from both the demand and the supply side. Critically analyze the major initiative taken by the government in this regard. This is a part of infrastructure. If you look at in the last few years, as part of infrastructure, they have asked, last year airways, they have asked airlines. Before that, they have also asked about the roads. And before that, they have also asked about waterways. But they have not yet asked about railways. Time for railways now. This year, the question can be about railways as part of infrastructure. So the question says that if the investment is made in railways, it can help in boosting economic growth from both the demand and the supply side. Critically analyze the major initiative taken by the government in this regard. So if the government is investing in railways, how it can boost economic growth both from demand as well as supply side? What do you mean by boosting demand, boosting economic growth from both the demand side and supply side? Supply side means in terms of increasing productive capacity of economy, in terms of increasing productive capacity, in terms of increasing GDP. Supply side, productive capacity in terms of increasing GDP. Demand side means in terms of increasing incomes of people, through which there will be more demand for goods and services also. Incomes of people, through which more there will be more demand for goods and services. That is what John Maynard Keynes calls it as a multiplier effect. He calls it as multiplier effect. If you are investing 10 rupees today, tomorrow it can result in 100 rupees increase in output. That means 10 rupees investment is multiplied by 10 times by the time the output comes. That is what is called a multiplier effect. John Maynard Keynes, one of the topmost economists, he had suggested this solution to overcome the Great Depression of 1930s. That is the reason why he asked the government to invest. So we are also asking the same question, how the investment by the railways can increase your GDP both from demand side as well as supply side, and what are the reforms that have been undertaken by the government in recent times. That is what the question is. Now after we have understood the question, let us go into the nitty-gritties of the answer. If you look at railways, what can you say? You can start your answer with some of the statistics about railways. India has the 4th largest network in the world. It has a 4th largest network spanning 70,000 kilometers. 70,000 kilometers. At present we have only 28 states, otherwise 29 states and 7 union territories. Right now we can say the whole of the country. Let us not get into all this debate about 28 states or 29 states. It has around 8,500 stations. 8,500 stations, 21,000 trains, out of which 2/3 are passenger trains. 2/3 are passenger trains. and they carry around 23 million passengers. And the remaining carry 3 tons of freight per day. Remaining trains carry 3 tons of freight. Tons. 3 million tons, sorry. 3 million tons. 3 million tons of freight per day. And so this is what we say about railways. We don't have to speak about much about railways beyond this statistics. But the problem is that our railways are facing huge amount of problems. What are the problems faced by our railways? Let us see what are the problems faced by our railways. First one is safety. We have so many unmanned stations also. Safety. Unmanned railway crossings. Second one is electrification. Electrification is not complete. Electrification. Third problem is excess staff. Excess staff. Fourth problem is excess staff, then electrification, safety, then this populism, political populism, unwillingness of railways to charge more. Fifth problem is cross subsidization. What is this cross subsidization? Railways, in order to subsidize passenger fares, they are charging more from freight. Cross subsidization. Next problem is competition from other sources of other modes of transportation. Other modes of transportation. Next challenge is privatization. Privatization. Next challenge is privatization. Next problem is railways require minimum 8 lakh crores for modernization, resource crunch. 8 lakh crores for modernization, resource crunch. Next problem is trade unionism. Trade unionism in the railways. Trade unionism in our railways. So these are all the problems that we see in our railways. These are all the problems. We have so many committees. You can take down Prakash Tandon Committee. Prakash Tandon Committee, 1994. Rakesh Mohan, Prakash Tandon Committee on Organizational Structure and Management. Prakash Tandon Committee on Organizational Structure and Management. Then Rakesh Mohan Committee on Policy Reinvention. Rakesh Mohan Committee on Policy Reinvention, 2001. 2001. Then Sam Pitroda, 2012 on railway modernization. 2012 on railway modernization. And then we have Bibek Debroy Committee, 2015. Bibek Debroy Committee, 2015 on railway restructuring. But the reforms of these committees are not implemented. the reforms of these committees are not implemented. So what are the reforms that have been suggested? First of all, what are the reforms that they have suggested? Let us see. First one is modernization of management, corporatization of management of railways, corporatization, professional management of railways. Second, adopting double entry bookkeeping practices, accounting reforms, double entry bookkeeping practices. Third is separating the core functions, separation of core functions from non-core functions. Core functions means rail operations. Non-core functions means running hospitals, schools, railway production force, all these things, non-core functions. Next important one is dividing the personnel into two categories, that is technical and non-technical. All the railway services should be divided into two categories, technical and non-technical. Next reform that has been suggested is public-private partnership. At least in freight transportation, Next, improving efficiency in terms of time, and ensuring safety. Next, rationalization of subsidies. What do you mean by here? Like the government has removed charges on cooking gas, the subsidy on cooking gas. In the same manner, the government should also remove subsidies on passenger tickets. This year's economic survey also talked about it. Give up subsidy. Campaign should be extended to railways also. Rationalization of subsidies. So these are all the major reforms that needs to be implemented. And where is the problem here? The problem is with politicization in the functioning of railways. The major problem is politicization, because all these reforms require the consent of approval of a political executive. All these reforms require consent and approval of political executive. Politicization. For starting with rationalization of the passenger fare, and then dividing the railways entire personnel into two categories, technical and non-technical. We have so many, UPSC itself recruits so many people to railways, railway account service, railway personal service, railway traffic service, RTS. They should be divided into only two services, technical and non-technical. But there is so much of a problem there. Why? Because you have to protect the promotion opportunities of all the people. You have to ensure better career advancement for them. And at the end of the day, you have to destroy railways also. That is the reason why these reforms are not implemented. Electrification, all these reforms are not implemented. And if another thing is that you must also let railways earn, raise money from stock markets by issuing bonds also. Let them raise money from stock markets. Let the railways issue bonds, because the government simply does not have money to invest in railways. They simply don't have money. and on the other hand, what is happening? Their earning ratio is also coming down drastically in the last few years because of very high subsidies given by the railways. And because of this cross subsidization, what is happening? Railways are losing out to other modes of transportation. As I said, road transportation. People prefer road transportation, or even waterways also are gaining more importance than railways. Railways are losing out. And when it comes to passenger traffic, because of the inordinate delay in arrival of the trains, people prefer air traffics. That is what are even the road traffic also, the road transportation also they are preferring. That is the reason why if you have to reform railways, it has to, the reform should be implemented, from different fronts. First and foremost, you have to make railways financially viable. Simply the central government does not have the money. As I said, 8 lakh crores of rupees are needed, minimum 8 lakh crores of rupees of money is needed. How can you raise this money? You can raise this money through public-private partnerships. But the railways have introduced public-private partnership. As usual, it has not become successful. Similarly, as we said, that let the railways issue bonds also and raise money from the stock markets. But for railways to issue bonds and raise money from stock markets, they must adopt global corporate practices. That is the reason why it has suggested that let there be a new service called Railway Management Service, or IRMS. That is what they have said. Let there be a new service called IRMS, Railway Management Service, consisting of mostly these professionals from what you call business administration, MBS, IAMs. They should be managing the railways in a professional manner. At present, too much of bureaucracy, too much of red tapeism, too much of inefficiency. That is what we are saying. Why? Because as we have said that railways are capable of raising growth both from demand side as well as supply side. And through supply side, how they can ensure better transportation of goods and services, including human beings with less cost of production if they improve their efficiency. And demand side, railways, when they are investing 8 lakh crores of rupees, obviously it will result in more economic growth from the demand side also. But only thing is that all these reforms should be implemented. What is required is political will. And recently the government has taken one of the right measures, that is integrating the railway budget with the general budget. Why? Because with railway budget, what is happening is that people are always looking for more, more discounts, more incentives from the railway ministry as and when the railway budget is presented. It has become too populistic in nature. And that is the reason why after the integration of railway budget with the general budget, the political populism at least has come down to some extent, but not to the fullest extent. Still, railways are affected by too much of this political populism, unwillingness on the part of the railways to increase the passenger fares, and which they are forced to earn from the freight traffic through cross subsidization. This is what you have to write for this question. As we have said that the government has not taken any major reforms in spite of the suggestions by various committees. That is what you have to say. What is required is political will. Next, India has become a power surplus country in recent times, but the sector still faces challenges in terms of transmission and distribution. Uday has helped the state government to overcome the problems in the short term, but the structural issues remain a major problem. Again, power sector, I don't think it was asked in the last few years. Was it asked? Power sector reforms? I don't think so. So this year they can ask. Why? Because the central government is talking about Uday 2 as part of power sector reforms. It is talking about Uday 2 as part of power sector reforms. So what we are saying here, the government initiated this power sector reforms during the previous regime of the government. And what were the achievements during the previous regime? What are the achievements? We have achieved 100%. That is what the government has said. We have achieved 100% in power supply through Saubhagya scheme. Saubhagya scheme. According to the government, there are around 21.3 crore households in the country. According to the government, there are around 21.3 crore households in the country, and government has said that except for a few hundred or few thousand households, all of them have been given electricity connections. All of them have been given electricity connections. All of them have been provided with electricity connections. That is what the government has said. And as part of Uday, the government has reduced the debt of state governments. Through Uday, state government's debt has been reduced. From 18% to around 15.5%. From 18% to 15 point, from around from 20% to 18%. The debt has been reduced from 20% to 18%. Next, the T and D losses also were reduced. Transmission and distribution losses were also reduced. Transmission and distribution losses were also reduced. But there are problems that are still there in the power sector. And the government is planning to solve these problems with what it calls Uday 2. The project Uday 2. So, what are the objectives here? First one is to ensure 24/7 power supply to all households. Now we have given connections. The next step will be 24/7 power supply to all households. This is one of the most important objectives of Uday 2. Second, to reduce the debt of state governments from 18% to 15%. From 18 to 15%. Next one is to reduce the cost of production. To reduce the cost of production. To reduce the cost of production. How to reduce this cost of production? What the government has said is that the government is trying to mix these conventional sources with non-conventional sources of energy. It is trying to mix the conventional with non-conventional sources of energy. What the government calls it as bundling. Bundling. Renewable energy sources. For example, water, this electricity generation, hydro, and then solar energy, hydel power and solar energy, they are less compared to thermal power. Yes, they are less compared to thermal power. Let these distribution companies, discoms, buy electricity from all the sources so that the cost of production will come down. The cost of production will come down. Next, important reform that the government has suggested is The government wanted to make these discoms accountable also for their performance. That is, they must supply power 24 hours a day. If they don't, they should be fined also. Accountability. Fines should be imposed on them. Fines should be imposed on them, so that they will improve their efficiency also. Next, for farmers in rural areas, the government had come out with another scheme. What is the scheme? Pardon? Yes, Kusum. What is Kusum? Have you heard about this? Yes? What is it? What is Kusum? The problem with Modi government is that they have so many acronyms. Here, Modi also an acronym, MODI. So, what is Kusum? What is the objective of this scheme? The problem is that farmers are using huge amount of electricity, mostly for irrigation purposes. They are using pump sets. These pump sets are not even fitted with the meters also, and which are forcing the distribution companies to incur huge amount of losses. So, as part of the scheme, the farmers are given to tap solar energy. Solar energy. Kusum means Kisan Urja Suraksha Evam Uttam Uttan Mahabhiyan. I don't know what this mean. Okay, you can find out what it is. But the basic objective of this scheme is to allow the farmers to generate electricity through solar energy. That is what. And what is the objective, and what can they get through this scheme? Whatever the electricity that he is generating there, the cost will be 1/5 of the amount of price he would otherwise be paying for, the thermal power. The cost will be 1/5. So obviously, and if he is generating electricity to diesel pump sets, mostly farmers nowadays are using only diesel pump sets. If he is using the diesel pump sets, if he uses this solar energy, the cost would come down by 90%. The cost would come down by 90% also. It will come down by 90%. And the central government will set up the solar plant. The central government will set up the solar plant with the help of the state governments. 30% will be given by the central government. State governments will pay 30%. 30% will be given as a loan to the farmers. 30% will be given as a loan. He has to only pay 10%. Has to pay only 10%. This is again a very revolutionary measure. One is it can reduce his dependence on diesel pump sets. It will be less polluting. Second one is it will also reduce the losses of discoms also. This is what another scheme the government has talked about. The next important reform the government is talking about as part of Uday 2. The next important reform is this one. Next important reform is introducing DBT in the power sector also. Cash transfers, introducing DBT in the power sector. DBT. Right now what is happening? The government is giving these pump sets. These pump sets are not even fitted with meters also. In the rural areas they are not fitted with meters also. So the government does not know simply how much amount of electricity is consumed by farmers. And the discoms are allowed to charge more from industrial sector to compensate for the losses for free electricity given to the farmers. And because of which, in industrial sector, they are paying 14 rupees per unit, which makes their products costly and less competitive in the international market also. There are so many problems here. So that is the reason why what the government has said is that instead of providing free supply, free power supply, the government has said that we will give you this much amount of money for your electricity. This much amount of money. That is what is called DBT, direct benefits transfers. This much amount of money will be given for this season because this is what we think is required. If you are spending more electricity, you have to pay for it. It reduces over exploitation of groundwater resources. It also reduces the losses of discoms also. Automatically it will come down. But again, whether all these things will be implemented or not, that we will have to see. But these are all what you call very good suggestions. These are all very good suggestions. Let us see whether they will be implemented or not. I am expecting again this year power sector reforms. Very important. Next question. Food security of a country depends on affordability, quality and safety, availability and natural resources and resilience. Discuss with respect to public distribution system in India and suggest measures. So in India, we are talking about food security. What do you mean by food security? As the question mentions, first one is availability of food grains. Second one is affordability, whether the people can afford those food grains or not. Third one is quality and safety. Whether they are getting quality food or not. And the fourth one is whether you have the sufficient natural resources also to produce the food. Food security is defined mostly both from the producer's side as well as consumer's side. In India, we say that food security is there from the producer's side because the government has huge amount of surplus food grains. But is it there from the consumer side? It is a big question. To ensure that food security from the consumer side also, the government is implementing what is called PDS. We have made this PDS universal also with the Food Security Act. But this PDS suffers from so many weaknesses. It suffers from so many weaknesses. What are the problems with PDS in India? Again, I don't think it was asked in the last few years. PDS reforms. It was not asked. This year, you can expect this PDS reforms. Basically, you have to talk about the Shanta Kumar committee recommendations regarding PDS reforms. What are the basic things here? What we are talking about as part of this PDS reforms. So first and foremost, you have to start with the farmers only as part of PDS reforms regarding procurement of food grains. Procurement of food grains. Second one is, you are talking about FCI, Food Corporation of India, which is responsible for procuring food grains for farmers. Third one is, the MSP given by the government for food crops to ensure food safety. Fourth one is this storage of food grains by FCI and other organizations. Next one is this maintenance of PDS shops, public distribution shops. And here the transfer of food grains from FCI godowns to PDS, that is where maximum amount of corruption takes place. Next, from PDS shops to people living below poverty line. This is the entire food chain, right from producing to reaching the needed much reaching in a population. So in all this there are so many problems. Now first and foremost, normally food grains are procured by FCI only for two crops, rice and wheat, right? But is it enough? The third aspect of we talked about quality, affordability, availability, then quality, the other things, quality and safety and the natural resources and resilience. Is it enough that poor people get only rice or wheat? They should also get vegetables, they should also get milk, they should also get other food articles which are necessary for our livelihood. At present only rice and wheat are provided through PDS shops. So what we should do in terms of food security, we must provide other food articles also. In terms of if you are talking about food security from a wholesome manner, comprehensive manner, you must expand the scope of the basket of commodities, the food grains that are provided through PDS. Second thing is, right now, it is the Food Corporation of India which is procuring the food grains. And what is the role of the state governments here? What is the role of the state governments here in terms of procuring food grains? Food Corporation of India will procure food grains mostly from how many states in India, especially rice and wheat? What are the states? Punjab, Haryana, Tamil Nadu, Andhra Pradesh, Madhya Pradesh and Karnataka. These are the states where, and Uttar Pradesh, Western Uttar Pradesh also. These are the states where food grains are procured by the Food Corporation of India. Maximum amount of food grains are procured from these states only. And it is the Cabinet Committee, this CACP, Commission for Agriculture Cost and Prices, will decide the MSP also. CACP will decide the MSP. And this MSP, this FCI will purchase these food grains from farmers at MSP, decided by CACP. This is what we say. And we have two different types of procurement here. One is centralized, second one is decentralized. Centralized procurement will be done by FCI. Decentralized procurement will be done by states and union territories on behalf of FCI, on behalf of FCI. Now, what is the problem with food grains procurement? It is open-ended. What is the problem with food grains procurement here? It is open-ended. What do you mean by it is open-ended? Even if the buffer stock is full, the state government and central government are forced to procure food grains from the farmers. And most of the time, the stocks with the Food Corporation of India as well as with the state governments are more than what is needed according to the law. Excessive food grains. That is the problem with this one. And since they are acquiring more than what is required, the problem comes with is storage. Where to store? Neither FCI nor state governments have enough these godowns. Most of the time these food grains are stored in open. They are left to the vagaries of nature. If there is a rainfall, that means the entire food grain will be completely destroyed. There are no proper storage facilities also. This is regarding food grain procurement. And the MSP, as we have said, MSP again is mostly populistic in nature. And then, as we said, maximum amount of corruption takes place in FCI. When these food grains are transported from FCI to godowns to PDS shops. That is where they are diverted, from FCI godowns to PDS shops. That is where maximum amount of corruption takes place. And then once there is the PDS shops, this is again corruption takes place. From PDS shops they will go to open market. Because there is huge amount of difference between the price at which the food grains are given to the PDS shops and the price, the open market price. In the PDS shops they are given at 1 rupee per kilo, open market price is 30 rupees. If they divert it to open market, they can sell them in the open market for 20 rupees and they can make huge amount of money. Where corruption has taken place, that is what we have to look at. And corruption also takes place in FCI also, within FCI godowns also. Why? Because FCI, it is they employ more number of people than required. It is found that the salaries of the daily workers who are employed by FCI, who work for 20-25 days in a month, are more than the salary of the President of India. It is found. The salary of a daily worker was 5 lakh rupees in FCI. Maximum corruption takes place in FCI. And the cost of storing food grains, rice as well as wheat, is very, very high comparable to international standards. The cost of storing food grains is also very high. And then, as we have said, when the godowns, when the food is transported from the godowns, half of the food will be diverted to open market. It will never reach PDS shops. From PDS shops again, it will be diverted to open market. That is where the problem is. According to Niti Aayog reports also, almost every year minimum 55,000 crores of rupees were lost due to corruption in PDS. That is where the problem is. And then another problem is that these food grains are given to people living below poverty line. This is where again problem. What happens is that most of these people, what do? They migrate to other places in search of work. For example, you are a person from Bihar, take your family, you migrate to Punjab during the the sowing season to find the harvesting season, to find employment for you. Can you get your food grains from Punjab? No. Then who will take your food grains in Bihar? It will be going into the open market. That is where the problem. And then, in recent times, another problem that we have seen is that when Aadhaar was linked to these ration cards, and because of not matching of these fingerprints in Aadhaar, they are not able to get food grains also. Like in Jharkhand, some poor families, members, they died because they could not get food grains on time also. These are all the problems, and the most important problem, as we have said, is high levels of corruption. So what is the recommendation here? What should be done? The recommendation here is very simple. As Shantakumar committee has suggested, in the long term we should move towards DBT, even in case of a food subsidy also, direct benefit transfers. That is the only solution. In the long term we have to move towards DBT. In the short term, what should we do? The Shantakumar committee has recommended the closing down of FCI, Food Corruption of India, Food Corporation of India should be closed down because it has become economically unviable. It should be closed down. Next thing is that, as recently the government also has said, people should be allowed to take food grains from PDS shops anywhere else in the country. It should not be restricted to their state only, because now it is linked to Aadhaar. They can take food grains from anywhere else in the country, as I said, to benefit migrant workers. Next, in Chhattisgarh, they have introduced EPDS, electronic e-governance in public distribution system. When these trucks move from say godowns of FCI and come to the PDS shops, these trucks are fitted with GPS devices so that people can see where they are going also, to reduce corruption. In Chhattisgarh they have done it. Next thing what they have done is that in Chhattisgarh, every stakeholder, every ration card holder was also given the information about how much amount of food grains are coming to the PDS shops and how much are being sold every day also, so that there is less scope for corruption also. Otherwise, what is happening, as we have said, most of the food is diverted from Pds shops to open, and this kind of e-governance also can be used to reduce corruption. Next suggestion that they have given is that why should FCI or for that matter any state governments also procure food grains? Let everything go into the open market. Let the people, like the suggestion is food stamps can be given. They can take these food stamps, go to anywhere, any shop, and get the food grains, food stamps. So that the expenditure spent by the government on procuring food grains, storing them would also be reduced. Next suggestion they have given is that instead of giving them monthly ration, instead of giving them monthly ration, give them 6-month ration once, so that you don't have to store that rice or wheat again in the open godowns. Give them 6 months ration at once. You can give them in the month of say 1st July or August, and then again in the month of February. Give them 6 months ration at once. So it becomes the headache of the people to store the food grains. Why should the government take that headache? These are all the recommendations. Give them 6 month rations. And then next recommendations they have given is the Shanta Kumar committee and other committees. Next recommendation they have given is that involve private sector also in storing food grains, because simply FCI or the state governments do not have enough storage capacities. Involve the private sector also in storing food grains. That is what they also have suggested. And then have these mobile applications to track the movement of the trucks as well as the storage of food grains in PDS shops on a real time basis, and also have an effective grievance redressal mechanisms. If I am not getting the food grains through PDS shops, there must be effective grievance redressal mechanisms. Next important recommendation is weeding out of bogus ration cards. Weeding out of bogus ration cards. This has already been done. The government has said that they have done this with linking ration cards to Aadhaar. Weeding out of bogus ration cards. Next problem is identifying the proper beneficiaries also. As I said, when the government says that 22.5% of people are living below poverty line, why should 67% of population get food grains? Identify beneficiaries also. All these is what you have to write for this question. Next, flood management in India suffered due to ad hoc response of state governments. Discuss issues in flood management and suggest measures also. So, why it has become problematic? Flood management in India has become problematic. So, you have to give some statistics here. You have to talk about some statistics here. It is said that in India, almost 40 million hectares of land, it is now almost 50 million hectares of land is prone to floods. 50 million hectares of land is prone to floods. And almost every year, minimum 3 million hectares of land, every year it is on an average 3 million hectares of land, crops are damaged. They are damaged due to floods. And it is the Ministry of Water Resources which is responsible for a flood management program. Ministry of Water Resources, which is responsible for flood management program. Now, why we have given this? As you can see, in almost every part of the country right now, what we are witnessing only severe floods. That is the reason why you can expect this question as part of disaster management this year. Now, what is the reason why we are witnessing frequent occurrence of floods? Why we are witnessing this frequent occurrence of floods? Why it has become, a major problem? First and foremost, rapid urbanization. Rapid urbanization. Next, changing course of river bodies. These rivers are changing their course. They are changing their direction. Third, climate change. We are witnessing more of a cloud bursts and heavy rainfall in recent times. Fourth, rampant illegal mining. For example, in states like Kerala, in states like Karnataka. Why these states are witnessing severe floods? Illegal mining. Illegal mining. Fifth, in these states, next problem is river beds, illegal sand mining also. Illegal sand mining in river beds. Next problem, why we are witnessing so many floods? Deforestation. The natural sources of resistance for floods, it has been deliberately destroyed. Deforestation. Next problem is construction of many dams. Too many dams over rivers. Construction of too many dams over rivers. What is happening? When there is heavy rainfall, dams would not be able to store more than a certain amount of water. Then you have to open the gates of the dam, which results in floods. That is what is happening in states like Kerala. Kerala last year itself witnessed one of the most severe floods that had been seen in the entire last century also. Again this year, again the situation is not different from what it was last year also. And this year what we have witnessed is states like Maharashtra as well as Karnataka also witnessing severe floods. Now you can see today's newspaper also, in Punjab and Himachal Pradesh also there are problems of severe floods. This is another problem. Next one is global warming. As part of climate change we talked about global warming also. Through global warming, what is happening? Just to give one single example here, in the month of August itself, the states like Kerala and Karnataka have received 300% rainfall of the entire season in a matter of few days, 2-3 days, thanks to global warming. It is said that this warming that is taking place in Arabian Sea, that is where the problem that is taking place in Arabian Sea. So these are all the reasons why we are witnessing frequent floods. The question is, what should be done? What can be done? Once we know the problems, we can automatically come out with solutions. So what should be done? What can be done as far as the flood management is concerned? First and foremost, the government has to come out with a long-term plan, which the government is yet to come out. As I said, it is the Ministry of Water Resources, and which is called now Jal Shakti Ministry. It has come out with what is called flood management plan, but the plan is yet to be implemented. Flood management plan. The government approved this plan during the 12th five-year plan. It was not there at that point of time, but it was there, and 10,000 crores were allotted by the government for this flood management plan. Till now, not even a single rupee was spent because of lack of coordination between the union and the state governments. So, what is this flood management plan? It includes first improving flood mapping and analysis, improving flood prediction systems, with the specific location targets, and actionable flood warnings. That is what we always say, disaster management can be successful only when it is proactive in nature. Second, is high priority research project. Utilizing Google Earth to help visualize and improve flood management. Google Earth to help visualize and improve flood management in India. Next, behavioral changes, focusing on behavioral changes. A cultural project focusing on behavioral changes. A cultural project involving online exhibition of the rivers of India. To create awareness among the people about utilization of river waters. Next, what else can be done? The next one is less emphasis on big multi-purpose irrigation dams. With more focus on constructing canals, ponds and small water bodies. To preserve floodwaters. Next important solution is for flood management. This one, following coastal zonal regulations. That is, not constructing houses near river beds, not having any permanent structures near river beds. Right now we can see in almost every city we have permanent houses near the river beds which are prone to floods. This is what another important measure that can be taken by the government. Next one is afforestation measures, so that forests can act as natural reservoirs of water. Afforestation measures. So this is what you have to write for flood management. Next question. Climate change is occurring much faster than predicted. Discuss the reasons for the same and suggest measures. Again, this climate change is very, very important topic because we can give the example here how climate change is occurring very fast. Out of 15 places that have received maximum rainfall in the month of August, out of the, you can take down all these statistics, out of 15 places, we are talking about how climate change is impacting India. Out of 15 places that have received maximum amount of rainfall in the month of August, 8 are in India. 8 are in India. And just to talk about how the climate change, just 2 months back, that is August means 2 months back, out of top 15 hottest places in the world, out of top 15 hottest places in the world, 4 were in India. You can see from hottest to the severest rainfall also. That is how climate change is taking place in India. And 2018 was the 6th warmest year since 1901. Sixth warmest year in 1901. Next, the mean temperature during monsoon, and post-monsoon seasons were above normal. Monsoon and post-monsoon season were above normal last year. Next, because of severe heat wave in Chennai, for the first time, Chennai had to get water from a special 50 wagon train to overcome its water crisis. Next, on the other side, if you look at the west coast, in Kerala at the same time, severe floods had Kerala and Karnataka, severe floods had caused huge amount of damage running into thousands of crores of rupees. In Karnataka, it was more than 20,000 crores of rupees. In Kerala, it was more than 5,000 crores of rupees due to severe floods. And the same Kerala and Karnataka, before this heavy rainfall, they were the states that were facing severe drought and famine conditions. And in the month of May, Odisha witnessed a powerful cyclone with wind speeds up to 130 miles per hour. A powerful cyclone with wind speeds up to 130 miles per hour. And it was the most dangerous cyclone in the recent history. Most dangerous cyclones in the recent history. As you can see here, the country is facing this climate change, the problem of climate change, which is occurring much faster than predicted. So what are the reasons for climate change? What are the reasons? I think most of the reasons are well known. What are the reasons? for climate change? What are the reasons in India for climate change? Deforestation. Next. What are the other reasons for climate change? Pollution, high levels of pollution. High levels of pollution. High levels of pollution. Global warming due to industrialization. Next, what are the other reasons for climate change? Next. Yes? Pardon? Basically the sources of energy, thermal power and use of diesel and petroleum products. Thermal power and use of diesel and petroleum products. Then what are the other reasons why climate change is taking place in India? Changing lifestyle of people, changes in the lifestyles, in a more luxurious lifestyle. As it is said that almost every house in India has a air conditioner and television and all other electric appliances. It has increased the consumption of power, changing lifestyle of people. Next, vehicular pollution in India in the last 20-25 years also, automobile industry. This is another reason, right? Next, failure to ensure, our failure to ensure these coastal zonal regulations and other preventive measures. Then what can be done? What should be done? What should be done? What are the measures which you can suggest immediately to prevent climate change? What can be done? First and foremost, we should shift towards green energy. Green energy. Next, what else can be done? Strict implementation of environmental laws, rules and regulations. Strict implementation of environmental laws, rules and regulations. Next, how to prevent this climate change? What else can be done? Yes. Pardon? Yes, promoting public transportation. Promoting public transportation. All the things which you can write for sustainable development, you can write all of them here. Promoting public transportation. Next one is tax on what is called green tax. Tax on polluting industries, as well as the taxes on petroleum diesel products to reduce their consumption. Tax on petroleum diesel products to reduce their consumption. Next, promoting green technologies also. Promoting green technologies. Next, sustainable or what you call zero organic farming. Organic farming. Next, shift towards dryland agriculture. More shift towards dryland agriculture. So this is what you can write. Next, India is facing severe water. Next, India is facing severe water crisis with no immediate solution in near future. Discuss the reasons for the same and suggest measures. Again, as I said, it will be asked either in your essay or in all your 4 papers of general studies also. So we know what are the crises, all the statistics also I think we have seen in the previous test also. And what are the reasons why we are facing severe water crisis? What are the reasons why we are facing severe water crisis? Why? On the supply side as well as on the demand side. Per capita availability of water has come down drastically. Per capita availability of water has come down drastically. And then next issue is water tables also had declined due to excessive exploitation of groundwater resources. Water tables had declined. Next is another important reason why we are facing severe water crisis is this one, in our cropping pattern. Cropping pattern, wherein maximum amount of water is only for irrigation purposes, almost 80% cropping pattern. We are using mostly food crops which require huge amount of water. Next thing, in a reason why the country is facing water crisis, our inability to utilize rainwater. As we have said, it is between around 6 to 8% only. In case of developed countries, it is around 250 to 300%. Our inability to utilize rainwater. We are using around 6 to 8% of rainwater only. Next is water conservation also we don't have. Water conservation methods. We have not adopted the water conservation methods. Long time back in cities like Chennai, it was made mandatory for all the buildings to have this rainwater harvesting facilities. Even now also only around 15% of the buildings in Chennai have only rainwater harvesting facilities. Even in those 15% also most of them are not functioning, including government buildings. Passing a law is different from implementing the law. That is what. And then coming to the other side, we have not properly charged water. We have not recognized the importance of water. We have given water free of cost to the people, because of which it led to over exploitation, over use of waters. And then there is huge amount of difference between what is called drinking water and water that is supplied to irrigation. Huge amount of difference. In most of the states, for example, in states like Maharashtra, the entire Vidarbha region is a fully a dry region, but still the government encourages the farmers to go for only crops like sugarcane, wherein poor people are walking at least 15-20 kilometers to get one pot full of water. Why? Because political pressure. In Maharashtra, these cooperative societies are extremely strong. They would not let the farmers to shift to any other crop also. We have not priced our water. We have not priced our water, knowing fully well that it is a very precious commodity. So this is what we say, this is what we say ultimately, because of which ultimately we are facing severe water crisis. It is said that by 2020, not very long, it is said that by 2020 in India, almost 50% of the population will not have access to safe drinking water by 2020. Almost 50% of population. And 21 major cities in India, 21 major cities in India will reach zero, will have zero groundwater levels. They will have zero groundwater levels by 2020. And 330 million people in our country are affected by this water crisis. 330 million people. And At this point of time, 12% of our population is living in what is called zero water levels. That is what we say. That is where what the problem is. So then once we know the problem, what can be done? What should be done? What are the reforms that we can suggest? What are the reforms that we can suggest? First and foremost, we must go back to the traditional practices, that is rainwater harvesting. We must catch the water where it falls, rainwater harvesting. Second one we have to think about is recycling of water. Recycling of water. Recycling of water. Third one is we must promote a decentralized approach to water conservation. Decentralized approach to water conservation, storage and reuse. Decentralized approach to water conservation, storage and reuse. Next, we must focus on behavioral changes. We must focus on behavioral changes by inculcating water conservation habits among citizens. Behavioral changes. Next, we can think of interlinking of river waters. Interlinking of river waters. Next, we must recognize that water is a precious commodity and we should tax water. We should put a price on water. Tax water. Next thing is agriculture sector. As I said, we must tax water as well as electricity in agriculture sector. Water as well as electricity in agriculture sector. Next, to shift the cropping pattern, to ensure shift in the cropping pattern, the government must give minimum support price MSP for other crops also, especially dry land agriculture. For other crops also, especially dry land agriculture. Next, in urban areas, the government should make it mandatory to have rainwater harvesting as part of building bylaws. That means the government should not give permission for new apartments and houses without having rainwater harvesting measures. Next, the government should focus on restoring water bodies. Restoring water bodies. Restoring water bodies. So you can write about all these things. Next question. Recent decision of the government to remove Article 370 and Article 35A has posed different challenges to country's internal security. Discuss. So what are the challenges we can see with removal of Article 370 and Article 35A? What kind of challenges to internal security that we can think of? Yes, what are the challenges to internal security with removal of Article 370 and Article 35A? It can promote secessionist tendencies in Kashmir, in Jammu and Kashmir. Secessionist tendencies. Second, it will give more fillip to Pakistan to interfere in our internal affairs. It can result in internationalization of Kashmir issue, globalization of Kashmir issue. Kashmir can become a global issue again, which India wants always Kashmir to be a bilateral issue between India and Pakistan. Next, it can result in more terror incidents in Jammu and Kashmir. It can create a sense of alienation among the Kashmiris. A sense of alienation among the Kashmiris. Next, it can create a sense of alienation among Kashmiris. It can strengthen the feelings of what is called Kashmiriyat. It can strengthen the feelings of Kashmiriyat. This is what they can do. It can strengthen the feelings of Kashmiriyat. It makes this integration of Kashmir into Indian Union a much more complicated task. Emotional integration. It can make this integration, emotional integration of Kashmir into Indian Union a much more difficult and complicated task. Much more difficult and complicated task. It can also drive moderate sections of Kashmir society. Moderate sections of Kashmir society towards secessionism and terrorism. It can drive towards secessionism and terrorism. And what are the solutions? What should be done? What are solutions? On the other hand, it also provides opportunities. On the other hand, it also provides opportunities for India. How? It can put an end to the debate regarding Kashmir forever. As Home Minister has said, when we talk about, say Lucknow or Patna or Bombay, when you go and talk to those people, will you say that they are integral part of India? You don't. But when you go to Kashmir, you always say that Kashmir is an integral part of India. Why don't you say about Lucknow or Patna or Bombay? Because they are part of India. When you talk about Kashmir, you have to always say that Kashmir is an integral part of India. Why? Because it is not. Are you getting the point here? When you come to Delhi, will you say that Delhi is an integral part of India? You don't. When you go to Chennai, will you say that Chennai is an integral part of India? You don't. But when you go to Kashmir, Srinagar, you will say that Kashmir is an integral part of India. Why? Because Article 370 created a separate identity for them. By removing this separate identity, we can ensure, we can put an end to the debate regarding Kashmir. We say that Kashmir, we don't have to talk about Kashmir being an integral part of India all the time, because it is now an integral part of the country. And second thing, we say that this abolition of Article 370 might create problems in the short run. It can create problems in the short run, in the short term, but in the long term, it can help in overall growth and development of the Kashmir. It can provide opportunities for the people of Kashmir to get jobs. It can provide opportunities for people of Kashmir to get jobs. It can help in improving infrastructure. It can help in improving infrastructure. It can also help in industrialization and overall growth and development. Industrialization and overall growth and development also. And with this, we can put an end to the Kashmir problem forever also, including terrorism, secessionism and everything else. as we have said, in the short term it can create problems, but in the long term it can provide sustainable solutions. That is what you have to write. You can expect the question about Article 370 also. So this is about all these questions. We can expect most of the questions in the examination also. Most of them can be expected. And the science and technology also, I think you can read them. The science and technology, you can read the answers. I don't think they are difficult. So this is the exam, and again when do we have the next, I think next examinations will be comprehensive tests, I think. Yes? From 2nd September only? Yes. Okay. In comprehensive test we will have 1, 2, 3, 4 and essay. Or if you want, we can have one extra paper in place of one, or if you want, you can have paper 1 also. If you want paper 1 or paper 2, 2 papers or anything like that. You want paper 1? Yes, no problem. Either way, it's not a problem at all. Right. So we will meet during the comprehensive test then.